Well, good morning, everybody, and aloha. Welcome to Punchbowl. Uh, my name is Peter Hirai, and I'm the former commander. I just relinquished command of Veterans of Foreign Wars Honolulu Post 1540, and I'd like to welcome everyone to today's ceremony. I'm going to be your MC to honor Navy Commander George Fleming Davis. At this time, I'm going to call up Chaplain Randall Potter, the Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam chaplain, to give the invocation.
You guys are very kind. Greetings, Davis family. I am Chaplain Potter representing Joint Base Pearl Harbor, and I'm glad to be your chaplain for the day. Let us pray. O God of grace and glory, we remember before you today our brother George Fleming Davis. We thank you for giving him to us, a grateful nation, in defense of our country, our Constitution, and our citizens. In your boundless compassion, continue to console the Davis family and their proud descendants, and inspire us all to live worthy lives, worthy of his sacrifice. Grant to all of us grace to see that earthly death has been swallowed up in the victory of the resurrection, so that we may live in confidence and hope until, by your call, we are gathered to our eternal home with all your saints, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Chaplain Potter. At this time, I want to introduce the family to you folks. Family came from California. This is the family of Commander George Davis. Please acknowledge, wave as we call your name. George Davis is the son of the honoree. And his spouse, Susan. George and Susan's stepdaughter, Twyla. And their son, Alex. And their son, Rusty. And last but not least, our technical specialist and AV master, Alex's son and the honoree's great-granddaughter, Haley. So again, we're gathered this morning to honor and memorialize Commander George Fleming Davis, Medal of Honor winner. He just had his name inscribed on the walls of the missing for a while now, but just recently his family arranged to get a memorial marker installed in Punchbowl Cemetery in this beautiful place. So we decided to work with the family and have this ceremony fitting for the marker. I think one of the decisions the family made to put his marker here was that he was also a local boy. So you'll hear about that a little later from the son. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and read some of the notes on Commander George Fleming Davis, U.S. Navy. So George Fleming Davis was born in Manila, Philippine Islands on March 23, 1911, son of John Alexander Davis and Mrs. Davis. He attended Punahou School in the territory of Hawaii, and on July 1st, 1930, was appointed a midshipman in the Naval Reserve, from where he entered the Naval Academy. He was graduated and commissioned ensign on May 31st, 1934, and subsequently advanced to Lieutenant JG, Lieutenant Commander, and Commander, and his commander date of rank was February 1st, 1944. After graduation from the Naval Academy in May of 1934, he was assigned duty in connection with fitting out the USS Tuscaloosa. He joined that cruiser when she was commissioned in 1934 and remained aboard until 1935. He was then transferred to duty as aircraft gunnery observer with Scouting Squadron 12-3, which is the aviation unit of the Tuscaloosa, and continued duty with that squadron until 1939. He spent consecutive duty on board the USS Brooke and the USS Hopkins from 1939 until September 1941, preceding his assignment to the USS Oklahoma battleship. This battleship was a unit of the Pacific Fleet. When the Japanese attacked the fleet at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, the Oklahoma was hit by 4 torpedoes launched by the first wave of attacking enemy planes and capsized at her berth. In January 1942, he reported to the USS Honolulu, also damaged at Pearl Harbor and later repaired. He was on board when the USS Honolulu left for San Francisco in mid-January, and when she made subsequent cruises to Australia and Samoa before returning to Pearl Harbor. While he was attached to the USS Honolulu, it participated in the Aleutians campaign in August of 1942 and later took part in the Battle of Tassafaronga, action at Guadalcanal in 1943, bombardment of Columbangara Island in the Solomons, and the fighting around New Georgia later in 1943. Commander Davis was personally awarded the Legion of Merit with Combat V device and was entitled to the ribbon for the Navy Unit Commendation Award aboard the USS Honolulu for outstanding heroism in action against enemy Japanese forces. He also received the Legion of Merit, the Silver Star, and the Purple Heart Award. After being detached from the Honolulu in 1944, he returned to the United States, and following a period of instruction in the Fleet Operational Training Command Pacific and at the West Coast Sound School in San Diego, he reported in October to Commander Destroyers Pacific Fleet. On November 26, 1944, he was assigned duty as commanding officer of the USS Walke, named for the destroyer of that name, which was lost in the Battle of Guadalcanal in November of 1942. In command of the new USS Walke, when she was attacked on January 6, 1945 by 4 Japanese kamikaze planes, Commander Davis was seriously injured. Not until he saw that the fires on his ship had been brought under control and the safety of his destroyer was assured did he consent to be carried below, where he died several hours later. And if you look at your program that we provided, the program has the citation for his Medal of Honor for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty as commanding officer of the USS Walke. And I'm going to skip ahead. Operating without gun support of other surface ships, when 4 Japanese suicide planes were detected flying low to attack simultaneously, Commander Davis boldly took his position in the exposed wings of the bridge and directed control to pick up the leading plane and open fire. Alert and fearless, as the Walke's deadly fire sent the first target crashing into the water and caught the second as it passed close over the bridge to plunge into the sea off the port side, he remained steadfast in the path of the third plane, plunging swiftly to crash the after end of the bridge structure. Seriously injured when the craft struck, drenched with gasoline and immediately enveloped in flames, he conned the USS Walke in the midst of the wreckage. He rallied his command to heroic efforts. He exhorted his officers and men to save the ship and, still on his feet, saw the barrage from his guns destroy the 4th suicide bomber. Succumbing several hours later, Commander Davis, by his example of valor and his unhesitating self-sacrifice, steeled the fighting spirit of his command into unyielding purpose in completing a vital mission. He gallantly gave his life in the service of his country. His widow, Mrs. George F. Davis, sponsored the destroyer named in his honor, the USS Davis, DD 937, at the launching of that vessel on March 28, 1956, at the Bethlehem Steel Company shipbuilding plant at Quincy, Massachusetts. And if you look at the cover of your program, you will see a picture of Commander Davis, and that picture is from his U.S. Naval Academy official program. And according to the official program, his nickname was Red, and it shows that he's from Honolulu, Hawaii. And some of the notes on his U.S. Naval Academy page shows that he was born on the tropical shores of Cavite, which is in the Philippines, nurtured in Hawaii, the land of perpetual sunshine. 4 years at the academy have but intensified the sunny disposition and sense of humor for our Red. With such a background, it is only natural that Red be bountifully endowed with wanderlust. This desire for the road or the high seas has had him on the verge of everything from setting out for the beaches at Lido to offering himself as a naval and military aid to some thriving young rebellion, be it in China, South America, or Annapolis. Red's varied and widely separated places of abode, extending halfway around the world, and his own easy naturalness of manner have combined to give him an enviable philosophy, that of enjoying the present to the full, come what may in the future. This philosophy, aided by the guiding principle of looking for the good in everything, has helped and will continue to help him get the maximum out of his life. Football, soccer, boxing, and lacrosse, to say nothing of Carville Hall, have all been graced by the efforts of this Kanaka. And for those not familiar with the term, Kanaka is a man of the islands. Lacrosse has been his first and best love, and in this sport he has he concentrated his efforts, with the result that many a more brawny defense man will testify to his accurate eye and ever-ready stick. Here we have Red, a most likable and congenial son of the islands, one who is indeed a pleasure to call friend and shipmate. At this point, I'd like to bring up George Davis, his son, to give a eulogy.
Thank you so much for reading that passage from his yearbook, because it captures him. This is excuse me for a minute. This is a homecoming for him because of, first of all, the people that he served with. In places like Tesseferonga, Tarawa, Palu, the Solomons, the Aleutians, Pearl Harbor, all those places where those young men gave up so much of their lives so that we could breathe the sweet air of freedom, which we so take for granted. It comes so easily, it's won so preciously, the cost is so high. It's also a homecoming for him because he grew up here, a stone's throw, just on the next hill over there. He would have wandered these hills like his father wandered that little spit of the Blue Ridge Mountains between the Shenandoah Valley and the valley that leads to Charlottesville in Virginia. His friends were here, and if you look down from this crater at that time, you saw no buildings more than 3 stories tall, and very few of them. It was almost a rural place. And as his mind was drawn to the water, he went down there, and that was his love. It was his love all through his formative years and all through his high school years and beyond. And it became a real pillar of his career also as a naval officer. He learned the water the way an Eskimo learns the snow, the way an Eskimo can see a grizzly bear or another hunter coming through the maze where somebody else would just see so much fuzz, so much static. He learned the water so that he could see where the shallows were and where the deeps are from the slightest movement on the surface and whatever might be moving through it, like a shark or later a torpedo. And that was his almost exclusive interest growing up. Of course, there was his father's job as a ship fitter for the U.S. Navy down at the Pearl Harbor shipyards. His uncles, his grandfather, were also involved in that sort of thing. Machinists, ship fitters, welders. To be a man in that family, you had to be something of a sailor, of a boat builder, of a ship fitter, and that also became a pillar of his service later on. Those interests were almost exclusively his focus. They were not on grades growing up. The records say he graduated from Punahou. Actually, he enrolled in the junior division of Punahou, known as the Academy in those days. But his grades were so bad, he couldn't make it up to the regular part of the high school where all the Howley kids went. He transferred to McKinley, the working kids school, and he graduated there in 1928. When I was able to get a hold of his high school records, the person that had the custody of those records said, you might not want to look at these. There were good grades in military science, naval science, as they called it then, the reserve kind of thing. But usually you saw a C, C minus, a D plus, a D minus, no Fs. So that was kind of the deal he made with his parents, that he'd do well in the Navy stuff, in the reserve stuff, because that's where he was going. He'd been going there ever since he was a little kid. But he couldn't fail everything altogether. But he did get an appointment to the Academy after graduation because of his Navy Reserve experience, and he was appointed directly from that. There was a hitch, though. He had to learn English. He spoke Pidgin, not the language of those Howley kids that went to Punahou, but the language of the streets, the Japanese, the Chinese, the Portuguese, the rough and tumble white kids that were living in those places in Honolulu, in that town, which was a pretty rough place in that time. And so he could surf, he could sail, he could dive, but he couldn't spell and he couldn't write an essay. He had to take a year off to learn how to write and speak English better before they let him in. Once he got to the Academy, it was a struggle. And he was having a really hard time with the subjects that came at him a lot faster than they would have at McKinley. And also, he kept a motorcycle in town, which he used to visit his grandmother in Alexandria, Virginia, and his great-grandmother, well, actually his great-grandmother in Alexandria and his grandmother in Charlottesville. The grandmother in Charlottesville was from his father's side, and the one from Alexandria, the great-grandmother, had been a widow of a Confederate soldier and had kept Confederates in her house during the rebellion. And so when it came time for the bill to come due on that motorcycle, he was able to appeal to those Southern gentlemen who made the decision whether he stayed in the Academy or not. It was a little bit soft played that his other grandmother had an uncle who died at Spotsylvania on the Union side. But he was on thin ice. After his grandmother died and his great-grandmother died, his father died of a heart attack right here in Honolulu. And his grades weren't very good. He was on thin ice, and that ice was beginning to crack. But he did get a wake-up call. And he also came in touch with a group of friends of his. These friends came in a time of need and encouraged him, kept him going. And the father of one of them was a remarkable Marine officer by the name of Holland Smith. He was a man who questioned everything, including himself. He'd been in World War I, assigned as a liaison because he spoke a little French to the French army, and he got beyond where they allowed journalists and people who might report on what was going on, and he discovered the total incompetence of their leadership and the needless sacrifice of so many of the combatants because of sheer stupidity. He was enraged, of course, as anybody would be, but he had to bide his time. He realized that any protest in public would be not only not heard, not listened to, but would be counterproductive. He made a vow to himself that when he was in charge at all of U.S. forces, there would be no such weight. There had to be some good leadership and good generalship. And he had a fire in his belly about that. He was able to prove that a few months later in a place called Bella Woods, when a desperate German advance on Paris had made its way through the British Army, made its way through the French Army, and through a couple of divisions of the U.S. Army. And the Marines were able to stop them in the trees of Bella Woods. As a result, there was some fallout because the Army was embarrassed by it, particularly a certain person in the Army known for a slouchy hat and a corncob pipe, and that would come to haunt him some years later. But in any event, my dad had his feet under him, and he graduated from the Naval Academy, not at the top of his class, but with good spirit, and I think he was a bit underestimated because of that Hawaiian good spirit, that enthusiasm for life. But he went on, he went through the Tuscaloosa, the outfitting of it, and they cruised up to San Francisco. And one evening, there was a ball at the St. Francis Hotel, and a young woman was dragged there by a friend of hers, and they spotted each other on opposite ends of the ballroom. And I think by the time they met, some part of them had it figured out that they were going to be together. The next morning, he took her on a boat ride, of course, on a boat ride into Still Lake in the Golden Gate Park. And they palled around together. They went to some of her performances in Berkeley's Greek Theater and some of the theatrical productions she was involved in. And eventually they eloped to Las Vegas and got married. They had a great marriage, and they had a wonderful time in Puerto Rico. And eventually he was assigned to the USS Oklahoma, where, because of his water experience, his diving experience, and his ship fitting experience, he was a good fit for the engineering department, where he would dive under the boat, under the ship, and diagnose any problems they might have. And at some point, she became pregnant with me. That was about November of 1941. And he sent her back to the mainland to be with her mother on the Lurleen. And his shipmates asked him, "Why are you doing that?" He says, "Well, those battleships are not going to protect us." You see, there was a set battle plan. The Japanese or whoever was going to come up in front of the harbor, and we were going to go out there with our battleships and we were going to duke it out. The technology of aircraft attack was really not understood by the brass at that time. Some of them, the carrier force, the Air Force got it, but the rest did not. The surface fleet had a lot to learn. Later on, when he was on the Honolulu, he was able to use his water skills again and spot a torpedo that was coming through the waves. Of course, nobody else saw him. He said, torpedo on the left port bow. The admiral, Admiral Ainsworth, said, left full rudder, which would have put the ship right in the path of the torpedo. Lieutenant Davis, at that time, countermanded the admiral's order, right full rudder, which was obeyed instantly by the helmsman, as Admiral Ainsworth later told it, gratefully. He was on top of things at a time when the U.S. Navy was having a very hard time. At Tassafaronga, we lost 4 out of 5 cruisers of the class of the Honolulu to 1 of the Japanese. We were just not prepared in the way we could have been because we were a little bit hidebound, a little bit too much into protocol. And that was the learning that went on in the Navy at that time. By the time that the Philippines came on, the Navy was operating on all 8 cylinders and then some. There were a series of battles around the Philippines and numerous skirmishes, some of which the Walke participated in. In one engagement, 6 destroyers went after the battleship Musashi, the largest battleship in the world, the Japanese battleship, and drove it off. It turned tail and run. With that kind of ferocity, it was amazing because that was sort of like a full-grown tiger in its prime being driven off by a family of alley cats. We were at a fever pitch of efficiency and knowledge and being able to do it at that time. And then came the invasion of the Philippines, Linguyan. Linguyan Gulf is a big U-shaped bay. It's easy to arm on both sides, where my arms are now, and at the base of it is the beach where the landings would take place. This was chosen because the Bay of Manila was heavily armed and not suited for a large-scale invasion, and the Japanese had built on the defenses we'd already put in place. It was a necessary place to do the landings. It had to be done. And so Admiral John McCain, the grandfather and namesake of the late senator, ordered Jesse, I forget his name, I'll remember it in a bit, the admiral to form a task force. And they went in there with guns blazing to try to take out those heavy guns on the arms of that U, and with our airplanes, and also the objective, that beach, which was lined with mines and guns on shore. With that degree of armament on both sides, there was incredible conflagration. Admiral Morrison, Samuel Eliot Morrison, the official historian of the Pacific War, called it the hottest day in the U.S. Navy's history. I saw one film clip of it. The flak was so thick that you could barely see there was sky behind it. It was the first of 4 days. Commander Davis took his destroyer, the Walke, in close because that's what he could do and he could do best. And started protecting those minesweepers. They were getting knocked out like clay pigeons from the beach. The Japanese had 30 kamikazes that day that they had allocated to the engagement. 5 of them went after the Walke. 1 of them went down before it was even within range. The other 4 came in. 3 of them were shot by these superb gunners who'd been at Normandy and beyond with him. 1 of them came straight over the bow and landed right behind him. He was on the bridge. Its nose went down into the control room. disabling the steering and the control room's features down there that control the ship, and blew up. Not from the bomb. The aircraft was launched too close to be armed. The tick had not ticked enough to set that bomb in motion, so it lay dormant as the gasoline exploded. And as it did so, it burned up through the superstructure, through the bridge, and set Commander Davis on fire. He still had his communication. Fire came up behind him, and he was able to steer his vessel out of those reefs and get clear of the danger they were in, and also coordinate the emergency steering that was going on and rally his guys to start dealing with that fire. The first one to reach him was a gunner. He came over the top of the edge of the superstructure, the bridge, and looked down, and he saw that the teak decking beneath it had totally burned out from the fury of the fire. He looked up to his commander, who said, "There will be no order to abandon ship." With that, he relinquished command of his vessel. 3 hours later, he succumbed down below. Half a world away, his wife, Sheila Davis, the mother of his two sons, George and Patrick, was going about her housework. As it was, she was doing some dusting in the front room with a little cigarette case that was carved out of tortoiseshell. It had been a gift from Mr. Gardy Smale, the former manager of the Imperial Hotel in Japan. As she was looking at it and dusting it, she dropped it. George is dead. We're not that connected. We feel each other. We feel our pain. We feel our joy. We human beings are connected in ways we don't know. So thank you for hearing the story. My father would be buried here if he could. He was buried at sea. But in spirit, he is here among us. And in that breath of freedom. So God bless America and those that protect our Constitution, the mother of that freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, George. You know, when the military entrusts somebody to be in command of a ship, not only do they entrust that person with great responsibility because the ship costs millions of dollars, but more importantly, they trust that person with the lives of the crew. And as we all know, Commander Davis, when he was entrusted with the lives of the crew, he took that seriously. He took it very seriously. And he took it in his heart, and he took it to his grave at the bottom of the ocean. So definitely, the Navy did right by assigning him. He was commander for 1 month and 11 days. And only 1 month and 11 days as command, he was true to his command and took care of his crew. And because of him, they could live. At this time, what I'd like to do is ask you folks to please stand. And we're going to have musician third class Brian Boydston play taps for us.